And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, awesome. So we are here with Emmy. Emmy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Emmy Inohato. I am an experienced designer at Small and Build, which is a tech consultancy company, and I live here in Houston. So if you go to Rice University, I'm right in y'all's neck of the woods. And yeah, I'm super excited to be joining y'all today and talking to y'all about accessible design.
Awesome. So quickly, we would just like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Sketch, Lily Rice's Center for Career Development, Third Slant, Rosenfeld, and then Wolfram Language, Rice Fondren Library, Neighbors, Sticker Giant, and A Book Apart.
As a reminder for this workshop, we'll be picking 5 people to win a design-related ebook from A Book Apart. So make sure to stay till the end of the workshop. I'll go ahead and send the sign-in sheet afterwards, and we'll just be randomly picking 5 people. And we'll announce those winners after the Design-a-thon.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then Emmy, you can start with your presentation.
Awesome. All right, are y'all able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. All right, yeah, so thank you for the introduction, y'all. I will be talking all about accessible design. And before I start, I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Emmy. Like I mentioned, I work at a tech consultancy company called Solemn Build, and I have been here or been at Solemn for 1 year now. I graduated from Boston University back in 2021. So I was recently in y'all's spots, like an undergrad, looking into experience design and seeing how I can break into it. So if you have like any questions about like UX design and like breaking into the industry as an undergrad, a new grad, I'd like love to open the floor like at the end and answer any questions. But yeah, let me get started. So what is accessible design? We hear a lot about accessible design and usability as UX designers, and for a very good reason too. So whenever I started at Slalom, one of my first projects, it was a government project. I was placed on it for about 5 months, and since it's a government project, every single government website and app, etc., has to be Section 508 compliant. If any of y'all have heard of Section 508, that's great, but if not, Section 508 is a requirement that tells federal government like to create, use, and maintain websites that are accessible to people with disabilities, regardless of whether or not they work in the federal government. So if you go to any like .gov website, such as like your local like driver's license, like whenever you go to renew that, or if you go to the NASA website, if you go to the Library of Congress, you will see that those are all websites that are 508 compliant. So as a part of this project, we had to put accessibility at the forefront, not only because it was Section 508 required, but also because our primary users for the particular application that we were building and improving on was blind and visually impaired people. It was also going to be expanded to people with other disabilities, such as like dyslexia and learning and cognitive impairments and more. So this was a very like new situation for me, and for the rest of my team as well. Like while we had kept accessibility in mind in previous designs, by using color contrast, etc., designing for things like screen readers was a very new environment. So we had to make sure to take the time and research and learn and do all of those great things to make sure that we are designing at the very forefront for our users. One of the important statistics to know is like the World Health Organization estimates that over 15% of the world's population identify as having a disability. And this is one of the largest like minority groups for users. And disabilities can range from a lot of different things. We can think of, we can think of like visual impairments, mobility impairments, auditory, one of those like, it's all of those like typical ones, but they also range and spread to a lot of different other things, which I'll go about in detail. And digital accessibility in particular is all about designing and building products so that regardless of a person's disability, they can still interact with a product in a meaningful and equivalent way that someone without a disability would be able to. So these are some types of disabilities. There are many accessibility issues that a user may encounter while using a website, app, or other digital platform, but these are the common ones to think about. So visual impairments such as color blindness or being partially blind, fully blind, auditory impairments, hearing difficulties. There's also seizure and vestibular disabilities. So for example, someone who has like photosensitive epilepsy, learning and cognitive disabilities such as dyslexia, ADHD, motor. So if someone has like arthritis or they can't use like the mouse or keyboard as well or as often or for however long as we might normally be able to. Someone in a wheelchair also. However, accessibility extends beyond this list. A common misconception is that accessibility requires a focus on users that have some kind of those disabilities that are previously mentioned, but that isn't necessarily the case. Accessibility design is inclusive of everyone, and barriers can be permanent, temporary, or situational. They range from people who are completely blind to those who have low vision. Of course, it doesn't involve just visual states, but it can also include people who are deaf and have mobile impairments or cognitive impairments. And then another interesting thing that I learned while on the project is that there are different states of disabilities as well. So we have situational, temporary, and permanent. Situational, it can extend to just like people, everyday people. So someone who is a distracted driver, for example, that's a situational impairment whenever using digital devices. So that's why, for example, if you use Spotify and it picks up that you are driving in a car, there is the Spotify car mode. So it's less visually distracting as if you were on just sitting down at your desk. It reduces the visual load, so you're able to focus on the road. And then there's temporary. So just like a week or a couple weeks to a month. Some people might have to make some changes. So if you've ever broken your arm, you'll know that typing on a keyboard is probably very difficult. And you might have had to make some changes on how you work and how you navigate. You might not be able to text with your right arm if you broke your right arm, things like that. And most of the time, accessibility comes in as an afterthought whenever looking at the design process. This is the double diamond design model. For people who don't know, it's very common in UX design, methodology, and design thinking, where here at the left side is the start. And then you go into discovering the situation and the problem of the product you're designing, defining a solution, developing and testing it, and then delivering the product out. So where user and usability testing specifically usually starts to happen is right here in this develop quadrant. And that is whenever there's an initial prototype and we might be able to have usability focus groups and doing that user testing to see okay, what in the prototype is working, what needs improvements, etc. And And that's whenever just usability testing comes into play. And not all the times does this extend to accessibility, specifically for screen readers, which for my project that was the user group we're focusing on. And if you've used a prototyping tool such as Figma, Adobe XD before, you'll notice that since it's a prototype, they aren't exactly screen reader compatible. Figma is having like a demo beta mode for compatible prototypes with screen readers, but that's more a recent change, and I'm super excited to see how that ends up. But so for accessible design within screen readers specifically, this dot is pushed back even further because screen readers need that backend developer code in order to pick up what is being read to them. So accessibility comes in often as an afterthought. And by then, a lot of the times it's too late in the business to change certain things, and a lot of things are missed. So you want to come in and to this discover stage and push the point back left to have accessibility at the forefront in the design. So whenever you're thinking about who your user is and you're creating those user personas and putting in those problem statements, you aren't just thinking about like your typical user groups, but you're also thinking about people who might have these disabilities or might need different ways of accessing technology. So how is digital accessibility measured? One of the ways that it is measured is through WCAG, and WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's primarily for those who want a technical standard for accessible design and development, such as web content developers, but it can also be used for designers like us whenever we are thinking about how we are designing and prototyping our app or website, whatever you may be designing. So there are 4 WCAG principles. Number 1 is perceivable. Can the content be consumed in different ways? 2, operable. Can it function without confusion and without the use of a mouse or complex interactions? So I'll go about this in more detail in a second, but some people can't always use the mouse to navigate content, so they have to rely on a keyboard. So that's another thing to think about. 3, understandable. Can a user understand how the user interface of a site functions and the information on the site? And 4, can different assistive devices, such as a screen reader, understand the website? And WCAG is, you can rate your website on 3 different levels. A is for good, AA is better, and AAA is great. And it's pretty difficult to attain the great level, actually. There's like a whole list of requirements that it must achieve. So highly recommend looking at that list if you have the time or you're really interested in it, but a lot of it does go into more technical detail. So what are some best practices for design and maybe some things that you can implement in this weekend during the event? I'll break it down into the WCAG principles. So thinking about perceivable, the perceivable principle, and making sure the information and user interface and experience is perceivable. So one of the methods, as you all might know already, is alt text. And this is like a really good image I found here on screen readers. So whenever a screen reader picks up that there is an image, it reads how the file was uploaded. So if a file was uploaded without changing the name and it's just a slew of numbers, that's what someone who is blind and using a screen reader would hear. They, whenever they navigate tab to an image, they'll hear image 94836, whatever. And that doesn't tell them a lot of information about what we might be seeing visually. So with alt text, you can be a bit more descriptive. Another way to practice this perceivable pillar is checking your color contrast. There's this website called webaim.com that I really love, and I use it frequently for just checking to make sure that the background is compatible with the text that I am putting on as well. I think for designers, especially like if you come from a graphic design background, we like to have a lot of fun with color and different gradients, things like that. But it's also important to keep in mind that not a lot of people could be able to actually read the content that you are looking at. So the WebIAM checker will tell you the contrast ratio and the different sizes as well for the content. So for example, a like very large header with a lower color contrast might work better than a body text that is smaller, and so therefore it has to have like a lighter foreground with a darker text, or the opposite. One of the other things that I learned is that color should not be used as the only way of communicating information. So for example, here, this is a form, and if you like don't have color blindness or visual difficulties, you'll see that the green is used as an indicator of correctness, and the red is an error. So for a person with like a visual disability, they won't be able to see or identify what exactly is wrong with this form. And this leads to some difficulties because then they don't know. So a better way of approaching something such as a form field or error states is using multiple indicators of whatever you are trying to convey. So if you're trying to let a person know that there is an email submission error right here, you can use colors still, but you can also use different icons and a text, an error state text, such as enter a valid email address. And so whenever they are colorblind or they can't, they have like their computer on grayscale, that sort of thing, they can indicate what is the item that needs action and what needs fixing. Another principle is operable. So I talked a little bit about keyboard accessibility. So functionality, it should be also be available from a keyboard. This is more from a development standpoint, but I think it's like super important to know, especially if you are interested in going into UX more and you might be working with more developers on certain apps or websites, and being able to think and communicate about these topics with the developers as well. And as I mentioned, our main user group for the government project were keyboard users or screen reader users, since they're like low vision or blind. And keyboard accessibility essentially means that all functionality that is available by mouse should also be available by keyboard. And we had to really think about this and make sure the keyboard focus does not get trapped. And so this is a little diagram of how you can use the keyboard. If you are interested in learning more, I recommend going on a certain website and just tabbing through it and seeing how websites differ in structure and how easy it could be to get trapped in a sense in a website and not being able to navigate to a different site. So one of the things that you can design it on, so like less of the dev side and more of the design side, is designing for focus states. Focus states are states such as like on a button whenever you are using a keyboard to navigate a site, it'll show what you are on, quote unquote. So if you are navigating via keyboard and you're tabbing through, it'll click share and then Pinterest and then Facebook. But if you're low vision and you're using the keyboard, you couldn't really be able to see that this Facebook is selected. So designing more obvious focus states, such as a thicker border or a different color, makes this content easier to be viewed. The other pillar is understandable. So making sure that the text is readable and understandable, for example, and that you are using consistent navigation. In UX design, this is one of like the other forefronts of whenever you're prototyping and initially coming up with your design, you want to make sure that throughout your website or app, you are using a consistent format. So not using a lot of visually changing information, but keeping it consistent throughout. And this helps us as well. So it's making it accessible and usable throughout like all content. So again, on text is readable and understandable. Making sure that links and buttons are very descriptive. So instead of using something that's vague on a button, such as click here or like go here and navigate. Well, navigate is a bit more descriptive, but instead of being vague, you want to be very descriptive with your terminology. Another thing with text is you want to stray away from using like jargon or acronyms and making sure to really spell it out for people. This is also helpful for users who like have dyslexia or might not be able to understand information in a certain way that we might be able to. And lastly, robust. This is also on the development side, but thinking about how your information is compatible with assistive technologies. And this can be achieved by providing like the name, role, and value for UI components. If you're interested in looking more into it, I recommend turning on VoiceOver if you use a Mac, for example, and going through websites and really getting like the shoes on, the hands-on experience and navigating their website to see how the experience might differ. JAWS is another screen reader device that is also used and very common, but highly recommend turning on VoiceOver. There's also a mobile version on like the iPhone, and you can see how it is navigable or unnavigable as well. Yeah, and then some resources for you all on accessible design are just like some listed here, and there are a bunch more out there as well if you go into these different websites. So Stark, for example, is a suite of integrated accessibility tools, and you can actually implement it in Figma, and it will check things like color contrast and more. A11Y/Ally, it's a community-driven effort to make digital accessibility easier, and they have a lot of different resources on there as well. Let's see if we can pull it up. But yeah, they have resources, videos, talks, and and courses as well. So it's a really great starting point. And Google also came out with a recent accessibility course that is free and online and gives you a really good background on different ways you can implement accessibility in development as well. Yeah, this was pretty fast, but I'd love to open the floor to any questions that you all might have. It can be about like accessible design or the project that I was on or any other work.
I have a question. So I know this is like with the Design-a-thon, it's very limited time constraints. So what do you suggest that people prioritize in terms of accessibility with their own projects? Like what aspects of accessibility, I guess?
Yeah, definitely color contrast, I think, is the easiest to attain in a short amount of time. So whenever you are building out, say, like a design system for the app that you are building, you can go on that aim.com website and check those. Also things like text size and color use and repetition, discoverability, thinking about all of those components that go into like making a website or an app navigable and like makes sense information hierarchy wise.
Cool, thank you. And Emmy, I think some people are asking some questions in the chat if you want to take a look.
Yeah. So one of the questions, can you talk a little bit more about the project that you were on and how you implemented these? So, so a bit of the background of the project. Again, for people who might have missed it, I was placed on a project with the government for about 5 months that was like my first project at Slalom. And since it was a federal project, the website that we were building had to be 508 compliant. And 508 compliant is a set of rules and regulations that ensure web accessibility. Also kind of goes into those WCAG, web content accessibility guidelines. And our main user group for the project that we're on were blind and low vision people. But one of the also, I don't think I mentioned this, but one of the other findings that whenever we talked with our user group and our client was that a lot of people who were using the site, they had multiple disabilities. So if they're blind, they also maybe had learning or cognitive disabilities, or like they had some sort of combination of disabilities. So we really had to ensure that not only was it like screen reader accessible, but also accessible for like those with auditory issues or things like that as well. And how we implemented these, yeah, this was I think probably one of the unique processes of the projects that we're on. So for my company, we kind of have this thing called the product engineering methodology, which is essentially a model for building a product. And like I mentioned, like at the beginning with that double diamond model, it kind of goes into that as well. A lot of times accessibility is thought as an afterthought. So we had to push that to the beginning. And how we did that was we had, from the designer developer standpoint, we had to have very early conversations with our developers So it wasn't like we had to design the whole website and then ship it off to developers and then test. We had to look at like a specific flow. So something as simple as a user searching for particular content. That's like a very like sub scenario flow. And what we had to do is prototype that, and then in like 1 week, and then the next week, the developer would build it out and we would test it with about like 4 different users and who use screen readers. So we would, that was sort of like our process, and we would get the good feedback from them and make sure to integrate it back into the design and keep that note whenever we were developing more and more flows and features. Does that answer your question okay? Or do you have any other questions about the project? And I can move on to the next one. Is accessibility still forgotten regularly in the industry? Are recruiters interested in designers who are well focused on accessibility? Yeah, so there is definitely a much like an improvement, I think, in recent years for accessibility and inclusivity in design. A lot of it because of different requirements, but you can see like that more and more features are being pushed out, which is fantastic. And a lot of times too, I think it depends on the user as well. So for example, if you think of social media apps or apps that are commonly used, such as like TikTok, there are a lot of accessibility features that have been added in the recent years. So one of the things is that closed captions, you used to have to like manually type it all up, but now in like I think in a recent, like 1 year ago, they generated like auto-generated captions. So that's something on an improvement on both like the TikTok end that makes it easier for like content creators to turn it on and make sure their content is accessible to everyone. And are recruiters interested in designers who are well focused on accessibility? I think definitely. It's if you can be able to really like highlight that in like your portfolio, or even if you've like taken like some of those like LinkedIn learning courses or express like interest in designing for accessibility, I think that's really fantastic and like a highlighted point, especially since more and more tech companies are driving in that focus on accessible design and designing for all users. And that's another thing to think about too. As UX designers, one of our like main qualities is user empathy and thinking about all users. So that's another thing to think about as well. And like highlighting that user empathy and like by focusing on accessibility and showing that you're interested in it and making an effort in your design process, like not only at the end, but throughout it, that you're making an effort to design for accessibility. It shows that you are like truly thinking about your user and truly exhibiting that user empathy.
I had a quick question. How do you anticipate these accessibility guidelines like changing in the future, or do you think they will change or maybe add more or less? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for WCAG specifically, I know that they are always like in development. So there's different like versions of WCAG. There's like WCAG 2.0, 2.1. There right now like in development of WCAG 3.0. So essentially what that means is that they are like, adding on more requirements or recommendations to suit a wider set of people. As far as like specifics, I'm not really sure. I think a lot of it would probably go along with like video and interactivity. Is like my prediction. So for example, another guideline that WCAG recommends is like making sure that you're sensitive to people with like photosensitivity or like seizures. And a lot of content nowadays is like you open the app or you open the website and immediately there's a video playing or immediately there's like sound like blasting. And that can be very like jarring and distracting for a lot of different users. So like having the option to even like disable and go into the website or go into user settings and choose to disable like the automatic, like the autoplay or the auto sound is something I think that's more recent, and it's a lot of tech is moving more towards that video content. So I think that's something that we'll probably have more like requirements or recommendations around guidelines like those.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions? If not, then we can end it here. I'll wait a few more minutes maybe. Feel free to also unmute if you want to ask or just send it in the chat.
Yeah, biggest accessibility mistake that I see within mobile apps. So this is more like website apps or like, but making sure that the website, whenever there's like a mobile version as well, so responsive design. I've encountered like a lot of websites where since it's compressed to like that vertical landscape, it's not even barely accessible. Like it's hard to find the navigation, or you have to scroll a lot to get to a certain area of the website, or you like the screen cuts off information as well since it's not responsive. So designing for those mobile states. And what else within mobile apps? I know whenever I turned on voiceover, whenever I was like doing some like personal like research for this project. So I turned on voiceover for my iPhone and just like went into apps and see like how I navigate through it. And the way that it works is you kind of have to like swipe left or right to essentially tab. So let's say that you are on what's a common app? Let's say that you're on Instagram and you're trying to get from your home page to your explore page. You have to like swipe 2 times, I believe it is, to navigate to a certain part. But sometimes it's hard to even navigate tabs or see content that other people would be able to see. So I think that's more like on the development side, but it's like a bit of an information hierarchy as well. So on like the UX standpoint, for like it's a lot of like communication with developers, but also laying out that information architecture with them, and like as something like a sitemap or information architecture diagram, and collaborating with the developer to show like, hey, these are the essential like headers or sections of the app or website, and this is how it would make sense for someone with like a screen reader to be able to navigate to. Yeah, also just text size in general. I know some like iPhones, and I'm assuming like Androids too, you can go into like your system settings and change the size of text. Like my mom has to do that because she's getting old and she like can't, so she's like has like the text messages and like that big font. But some apps don't have that option. So that's another thing too, like if you are actually like designing like a full-fledged like app or website, and making sure that your content is customizable is big too. So users have maybe like different settings, like I guess small, medium, or large font size, or there's a colorblind option or low contrast vision option as well. But if you're, so for example, like just like this weekend, if you're designing a mobile app, Figma has an app on like the iPhone, and you can test out like your design on from like the laptop and open it on your mobile phone and see how the content actually looks and feels on the mobile app, because it can, I know like it can be like a lot different going from computer to phone. Like some content will seem like a good size on the computer, but then you get to the phone, it's like, wait, like the spacing is way off, or I actually can't even read what that button says. So that's something that you can implement in like this weekend.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Emmy. We are going to go ahead and conclude this workshop. Thank you everybody for joining. We hope you guys learned about accessible design. I definitely learned just sitting in on this presentation. So hopefully you guys can implement Emmy's tips for accessible design into your Design-a-thon projects. So yeah, this is the end of the workshop. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.